What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to another episode of Oddity Acres. Today we are in Willowick, Ohio, and we are at a very historic location, one of which that I have not heard of up until a couple days ago. The story is incredible. It's a story of a horrible tragedy and shipwreck that happened here on Lake Erie, right off the shores of where I'm looking right now. And on top of that, where I'm sitting right now is now a parking lot, but it was and still is a mass grave. A lot of the graves were kind of washed away as the lake eroded into the shoreline. However, we're standing right here where a lot of history took place, and it's a very interesting story. So today is a bad day to do it, however, because we are at the end of a massive storm system that moved through the Midwest, and Cleveland is on the tail end of it, and the cold front is moving in. And the winds right here on the lake, I can see the water literally coming up over an 80-foot cliff here. The winds are blowing probably 60, 70 miles an hour. My car is actively shaking. So it's going to be very difficult for you to hear a word I'm saying out there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to film around. I'm going to show you all the locations, but I'm going to do a little bit of voiceovers here. So stay tuned to hear the story about the GP Griffith. So the SSGP Griffith was a passenger steamer that burned down and sank on the shores of Lake Erie here on June 17th, 1850, right off the beach here on Willowick, Ohio. So this resulted in the loss of lives between 241 and 289 people. And the destruction of the GP Griffith remains the third largest loss of life on all of the Great Lakes. So the Griffith was launched in 1848 and named after a businessman named Griffith P. Griffith. The ship was 193 feet long and weighed 587 tons. So on June 16, 1850, the GP Griffith took off from Buffalo, New York, en route to Toledo, Ohio, with various stops along the way. The Griffith was carrying 326 passengers, a lot of them immigrants from Ireland, Germany, England, and Scandinavia. So the ship stopped in Erie, Pennsylvania, and then a little bit further down the way, it stopped in Fairport Harbor, Ohio, which is actually about 30 minutes east from where I am right now, and then began its journey to Cleveland, Ohio, which is about 30 minutes west of where I am right now. Now, around 4 a.m. on June 17th, they were about 2 miles from Fairport Harbor heading west when the ship's wheelsman, Richard Mann, reported sparks coming up from the ship's smokestacks. Now, Roby, the ship's captain, at this point ordered the ship's route altered towards the shoreline. However, this ultimately proved fatal because the ship's speed fanned the flames and consumed the aft of the ship, forcing all the passengers forward. At this point, panic ensued and the crew completely abandoned their posts. This caused the ship to run out of steam, the paddles to stop turning, and eventually the momentum of the ship and the waves ended up bringing the ship close enough to shore until it ran into a sandbar about 8 feet deep in the water. Now, at this point, they were only about half a mile from the shore, but the flames continued to burn and it actually consumed everybody else that was left on board. Now, a lot of people did jump into the water, but most drowned because either they didn't know how to swim or they were pulled down by other panicking passengers. Now, the ship's mate was able to swim ashore and find a small boat and did paddle back out to start rescuing passengers. Now, Captain Roby threw his wife into the lake in attempts to save her and did the same for his child and his mother and actually the wife of the ship's barber as well. Now, unfortunately, the captain and his wife and his entire family perished in this tragedy, but the barber's wife was able to swim ashore and make it, and she was the only woman to survive. Now, the steamer called the Delaware was able to tow the still-burning ship into the shoreline, but unfortunately, due to the fire, all the ship's records were destroyed, and there was no way to accurately determine who actually perished in the tragedy. Only 37 survivors were ever accounted for, and they think the death toll could be as high as 280 people. Now, it states that there were 154 remains that were actually recovered. Most of them on the beach. The waves had washed them into the shoreline, and the floating bodies actually were able to float, causing them to end up all along this dotted shoreline here on Willowick, Ohio. Now, at this point, a large committee of local citizens formed to build and dig mass graves here on the shoreline, and 47 men, 24 women, and 25 children were buried there. Any remains that they were able to identify was actually taken to Cleveland on a steamer called the Diamond. Now, unfortunately, when visitors came the next day to investigate the grave and the site that this horrible tragedy took place, they realized that there were a mass amount of bodies that were uncovered from the grave. People were looting, trying to find things that were worth value, things that are on the passengers still, because they knew that they were just pulled ashore and buried. Up until 2 weeks after the wreck, bodies were still floating onto shore. They were assuming that because a lot of these victims drowned, that their bodies eventually bloated, causing them to rise to the surface and float inland. Those bodies were just added to the mass grave. And I believe from what I'm reading, the mass grave is a little bit on a lower level. So we're like on a cliff line, and the cliff kind of goes down. And I believe that they were probably buried closer to that shoreline, because I don't know why they would be dragging them up a hill to be in this actual park area. But with that being said, I'm sure that the waves and the weather of Lake Erie, between then and now, did a lot of erosion and washing away a lot of these bodies, so they have a watery grave, unfortunately. But this is the site that it happened, and I didn't know about this. I've been in this area for years, and I've never heard about it. I know there's this plaque that was here that talked about the incident, and I'm sure a lot of people haven't either. So that's why I'm bringing you here. That's why I'm bringing you all the facts here. The wind out here is absolutely crazy. I know you can hear it. You can't even breathe. This is insane. This is the location of the mass graves after the Griffith sank, right here on the waterline. The lake is angry today. These waves are massive, and they are coming up over the shoreline down here. Super crazy. Wow. The wind is actually blowing me over. It's hard to hold on to the phone, and I'm actually pushing back against the wind. Oh my God. It is crazy up here.
Following the completion of the Erie Canal from Albany to Buffalo, New York, Lake Erie became an important link in an all-water route for immigrants traveling from the eastern seaboard into the Midwest. The 600-ton steamer G.P. Griffith launched in 1847 and was one of the dozens built to capitalize on this booming trade. On June 17, 1850, the Griffith, outbound with more than 300 passengers on a 3-day voyage from Buffalo to Toledo, caught fire and burned 220 yards from this overlook. Many of the German, English, Irish, and Scandinavian settlers were laden with money sewn into their clothing, and few reached shore. Contemporary accounts listed almost 286 lost. Most were buried in a mass grave on the beach, since reclaimed by Lake Erie. The Griffith incident remains one of the worst maritime disasters on the Great Lakes.
Thank you so much for watching another episode of Oddity Acres. Sorry that we did this whole thing on voiceovers. As I said, the wind is absolutely insane. But I appreciate you tuning into the story and learning about the horrible tragedy of the Griffith, the shipwreck here on the shores of Lake Erie. We got a lot of good stuff coming up. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. It really helps out the video, helps other people see this video. So thank you very much. If you're new here, welcome. And we always post really cool content. We got some great trips coming up, so stay tuned for that. In the meantime, I hope you guys are all doing well. Stay scared and happy Halloween.